But just get to what you thought of the actual result. Were you surprised? Did you see this coming?
I wasn't surprised. I did see it coming. Look, this is fundamentally always going to be, I think, about the level of dissatisfaction that the American people have with the state of the country as it is. Opinion polls have been saying for a long, long time, for the last 2 years, more than two-thirds of the country think the country is on the wrong track. They strongly disapprove of Joe Biden. Kamala Harris made no real effort to kind of distance herself from Joe Biden. She was, in effect, the incumbent candidate. And so in those circumstances, as we've seen, by the way, around the world, it's a very difficult year for incumbents. People are going to vote against the incumbent. So I was not really surprised at all.
So Trump he's a known quantity because we saw him for the first 4 years. But this feels like a very different setup for Donald Trump in that it was a less chaotic campaign. He's going to have the Senate, probably the House. He's got the Supreme Court. He expected to win, or at least has thought about what he wants to do, have his won. He's got 2 years until the midterms. Presumably in those 2 years, he'll have a chance to do what he wants to do and be judged on it.
Yeah, there are several differences from the first time he took office 8 years ago. One is he expected to win this time. He didn't really expect to win, and he wasn't prepared for office 8 years ago. Second, he'll have a team that is much, much more cohesive and much more identifiably his team. When he won in 2016, there was no real kind of Trump movement at that point. It was just all about the man. And he had to pick his key administration officials from a kind of a range of traditional Republicans who sort of are always there, available to do jobs in a Republican administration. People he sort of liked, people he knew in business who didn't necessarily have any particularly political, ideological position at all. Generals, he seemed to have a bit of a hankering for generals. So it was a really odd mix of people, very few of whom were genuinely loyal to him or to his policies. This time around, he's been preparing for this for at least 2 years. He has a very, very loyal team. He has a Republican Party that is entirely his party, and so they will be much more coherent. They'll be much less, vociferous. There'll be much less of the kind of leaking that we saw in the first administration. And as you say, he's going to have, as he did in the first term, he's going to have a majority in the Senate, a majority in the House, a small majority in the House, and he's got an agenda, very clear agenda on immigration, on trade, on the economy, on some of these other issues. And yeah, he'll have a good run at being able to get through. And a Democratic Party, by the way, this time, unlike in 2016, where there were a lot of question marks about his election, he hadn't won the popular vote. He won narrowly. There were these absurd stories about, the Russians having installed him and all that stuff, which really undermined him. He's subject to investigations and all that stuff for the first 2 years. All that's going to be gone this time. So he's going to be a much more focused, organized, cohesive administration, which will, get his agenda through.
And he's got Susie Wiles, who he introduced to the world, I think, on the night of his acceptance of the victory on election night. You've met her. You know her. She's heralded as the woman who can stop Trump being a massive mess all over the place and actually focus what he wants into delivery.
Again, she's a very loyal. She's actually only worked for Trump for the last couple of years, but she's very loyal to him. She stayed with him as his campaign manager right through the last year and a half, which again is different from 2016. In his 2016 campaign, he went through campaign managers who he wasn't satisfied with. She's been there consistently. She has already been announced as his chief of staff, first female chief of staff in White House history. Again, unlike 2017 when he took over and he had a succession of chiefs of staff, who were not particularly loyal or particularly associated with the ideas that Trump had. She's a very tough, robust, take no prisoners person, and that's what you want as White House chief of staff. You want someone who's loyal, who has, frankly, is a little bit scary in terms of managing the staff because it's a very unwieldy organization, the White House staff, but one who's absolutely going to get his job done and get his tasks done. And she's a really, really tough figure, I think, who will do that very well.
Let's talk about some of the things he might do. Tariffs. He can do them we think he can do them with executive order, or will he need some sort of complacence from the Senate? But do you think he'll actually do them? He talked a good game before on tariffs, but do you think he'll deliver them? Do you think it'll be as high as predicted?
There are two question marks about the tariffs. Well, yes, I think he believes. Trump has not been a kind of consistent political figure throughout his life. He was a Democrat for a long time, associated with Bill and Hillary Clinton. One of the few things he genuinely seems to have believed in all the way through his, as far as we can make out, his business and political career, is that the world of trade is unfair to the United States. The US runs these huge deficits, and that's in large part because other countries kind of cheat or don't treat US products fairly, and therefore sort of exclude them from their markets. He was gone about this in the 1980s when Japan had when Japan was the major economic competitor. So he definitely believes in the principle of tariffs, and indeed the underlying principle that trade is unfair. There are two questions, though. One is, to what extent is he waving this threat as a negotiating ploy? We all know Trump is the master of the art of the deal. It's the way he's made his career. He goes to the max with threatening all kinds of positions in his business and political career in order to get a deal done. So is this a threat to the rest of the world? That well, two things. Is it a threat to American companies that unless you bring your manufacturing products back to the US, your products will be subject to tariffs? And is it a threat to other countries that unless you start letting more American products in, we're going to tariff you? So there's an element of that. And then the second point is whether or not he can get these tariffs done. Under trade law in the United States, it's not clear, and there will definitely be legal challenges. Under trade law in the United States, the president has significant authority to impose tariffs in particular sectors, to protect particular sectors that are deemed as being vulnerable to international competition for various reasons. Infant industries, industries that are seem to be subject to unfair competition, such as dumping and things like that. Trump is proposing something and by the way, those were the terms under which he imposed tariffs in his first administration, and indeed in which under Joe Biden has continued those tariffs in his administration. There's a bigger question about whether or not you have the executive authority to pose an across-the-board tariff, which, of course, by definition is not protecting specific industries. So that may require legislation. And if it requires legislation, there's a big question mark about whether he would have the votes, particularly in the Senate, even with a Republican majority, because there are at least half a dozen Republican senators who are not enthusiastic about that.
That's really one to watch. Before you go, Bill's got in touch to say difference maybe for Trump is that the mainstream media last time shouted for impeachment before he became president. He's beaten the mainstream media too now. Do you think Trump likes to set himself in opposition to the mainstream media, the liberal media? He regards them as an enemy. Do you think that he's won that battle? Trump versus the traditional American media, Trump's won it, and that's why he's president?
Oh, he's not only won that battle. I think the media has been the traditional media has been essentially reduced to a kind of meaningless sideshow now. I wrote in my Wall Street Journal column this morning, and forgive the biblical reference, that if 2016 was the writing on the wall for the media, then 2024 was the kind of collapse of Babylon. I mean, this is they have through this. I mean, not only through undermining trust in themselves by this continuous campaign against him, this propaganda campaign of trying to undermine him and tell people that he's basically unfit to be president, in fact, unfit to be a free man and should be in prison. Not only have they done that and undermined trust in themselves, they've failed even by their own lights because they've failed to convince anybody. Donald Trump went from 63 million votes in 2016 to 73 million votes in 2020 to probably 75, 76 million votes in 2024. All the time subject to an extraordinary, unprecedented media campaign of vilification, which has just failed. So I think will there be some soul searching? There was after the 2016 election. There will be a little bit probably this time around. Doesn't really matter. The media has just lost the plot when it comes to most of the media when it comes to American politics. They're not trusted. There are alternative sources of media, podcasts, different platforms. X has become a very important focus for people who just don't really want to read or don't trust the mainstream media. So, yeah, Trump has won that battle.
And we'll see what he does in the next 4 years with his victory. Gerard, really interesting stuff. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me.
That's Gerard Baker there from the Wall Street Journal.